What were Friedrich Hayek's major contributions to the principles of the free market and the free society? Join Richard Ebeling and me as we address that question in this week's Libertarian Angle. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, President of the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the principled case for the libertarian philosophy. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, Professor of Economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again for another round of Libertarian Angle.
Good to see you and to be here with our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, thanks again for tuning in. If you're new to the Future of Freedom Foundation, this is your first exposure to our work. Keep tuning in to Libertarian Angle, but come over to our website at fff.org for around 32 years of principled arguments in favor of the free society. And subscribe to our monthly journal, Future of Freedom. Become a donor to FFF. So, Richard, you know, we've spent a lot of time on Austrian economics over the years, mostly on general principles, but also focusing a lot on Ludwig von Mises, who served as a big inspiration for both of us. And let me give just a little bit of background for Richard, because we're going to be discussing some Austrian economics today. When I first met Richard, he was going to be teaching at the University of Dallas, and the head of the department there, with whom I'd been taking a tutorial on Austrian economics, said, I got this new guy coming into the department that knows more about Austrian economics than anybody in your age group. And I'm turning over the tutorial to him. And we were getting ready to start with Ludwig von Mises's magnum opus, Human Action. And then Richard went on to become the Ludwig von Mises Professor of Economics at Hillsdale College, went on to become the president of the Foundation for Economic Education, and now teaches at the Citadel. I'm sure I'm missing some of there, but he's written countless articles and books, edited books and so forth on Austrian economics. So what we're going to discuss today is the contributions of Friedrich Hayek. I think I'm going to defer mostly to Richard on this. Hayek has certainly served a bigger inspiration for me, not as much as Mises has, but certainly a lot. And so let me just throw out something, Richard, here, and then I'll throw the wand over to you. That were something that sticks out for me with Hayek, and that was his concept of the spontaneous order, where he talked about, you know, the real phenomenal part of a free market system is that you have this spontaneous order that is really no part of anybody's design. Nobody's designing this thing, but it comes into existence as a result of just human action, with everybody seeking his own plans and trying to live his life and better his condition, that it brings into existence a society that nobody could have planned. And that if anybody had tried to plan, it would have been a total fiasco. And when I think about this concept, I think about like a grocery store that, you know, every morning is just phenomenal. We take it for granted because it's such an ordinary part of our lives. But when you think about it, when you walk into a grocery store, and usually have a selection of grocery stores. Where I live, I can go to like 5 or 6 within 5 minutes of my home. I mean, it's filled with all these fruits and vegetables and organic foods and non-organic foods and cans and eggs and milk, and everything's fresh. I mean, it truly is a phenomenal thing. And yet, when you stop to think about it, it's quite amazing because nobody's planning it. There's not somebody in Washington or somebody in the state capital or the locality saying, okay, get a certain number of carton of eggs to that store, then another store. No, it's like everybody's just pursuing his own self-interest, you know, including the person that's raising chickens and laying eggs on some farm. And somehow or another, with everybody coordinating his own efforts, this phenomenon of grocery stores that are fully packed with things, fresh foods, comes into existence. And so that to me is one of the greatest insights into a free market economy that Hayek ever gave us. So what do you think?
Well, let me sort of start by giving a little thumbnail biography of him for those who might be viewing us and are not too familiar with him. First of all, why is he famous? Part of the reason is he won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1974. The question is why? How did this come about? What were his contributions, of which one of them you were just emphasizing? Hayek was born in 1899 in the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. He fought in the First World War as a very young boy in the Austrian army on the Italian front. He returned from the war to a defeated Austria, obviously, and in an Austria that was suffering from a increasingly hyperinflation similar to the one in neighboring Germany. And he graduated in an accelerated program from the University of Vienna, first with a law degree, and then a second advanced degree in political science and economics. After he graduated, he needed a job, and he ended up working for Ludwig von Mises. Ludwig von Mises was already a well-known economist in Austria, particularly for his work on what we now call the Austrian theory of money and the business cycle. But Mises had been making his living as a senior economic analyst for the Vienna Chamber of Commerce. But besides that, in the post-war period, he was handling an Austrian branch of a commission working with the League of Nations. And Hayek was hired by Mises as his assistant. And Hayek, in later years, emphasized more than once in writing that his interactions with Mises, as well as reading Mises's books as they were coming out, had a greater impact and influence on his thinking and his direction of questions and problems to attempt to solve, as well as the general schema in the context of which he thought about these things, than any other living economist. But in the late 1920s, again with Mises's assistance, Hayek became the first director of the Austrian Institute for Business Cycle Research, because his early works, in his late 20s, a young man, was on money in the business cycle. And this led to him being invited to give a series of lectures at the London School of Economics in the early months of 1931, and being offered a job there, which eventually became permanent. He was at the London School of Economics from the autumn of 1931 until 1949. And the lectures became his book, Prices and Production. In this book, he laid out what became a version of his variation on the Austrian theory of the business cycle. And this was his attempt to analyze the causes and the cures behind the Great Depression, through which the world was then passing. He basically argued that the Depression was not a creation of failures of the marketplace, but was due to mismanagement of the monetary system and the banking system by central banks, particularly in the case of the United States by the Federal Reserve System. And it had set off the stages of a boom leading to a bust, and that government interventions in the aftermath of the bust is what made the Depression so severe and long and deep and difficult to recover from. So it's not a failure of the market, but monetary mismanagement by central banks, and then government intervention that prolonged the agony of the economy's inability to more easily and more rapidly adjust in the post-boom period. But while that was his claim to fame, it became the basis of him being viewed as one of the leading rivals for the emerging Keynesian revolution developed by John Maynard Keynes, the famous Cambridge economist. He also, as the 1930s progressed, became entangled in the issue of market economies versus central planning. He had read Mises's famous book on socialism, in which Mises had argued that socialism could not work because of the socialist abolition of the institutions of money, competition, and prices. And Mises took up that argument in the context of English and American socialists and began challenging them, developing themes of his own version of Mises's ideas as to why socialism was unworkable. The culmination of this, he wrote a series of articles, is one of his most famous articles, and one that perhaps was significant in him winning the Nobel Prize in 1974. And that was an article that appeared in the September 1945 issue of the American Economic Review, the premier economics journal. And that article is called The Use of Knowledge in Society. And this picks up on the very theme that you were getting at, Jacob. Hayek said in this article, we're all familiar since Adam Smith about the importance of division of labor. There's the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. And obviously each one has specialized skills that they apply as the means of earning a living by trading their specialization for the wares of their neighbors. And the butcher knows how to cut meat, and the candlestick maker knows how to make candles, and the baker knows how to turn dough into bread. But he said there's more to it than this. There's layers and dimensions of human knowledge. And very quickly, if I may, the crucial elements, he said, there's textbook or scientific knowledge. As I tell my students, that's the kind of knowledge that they're learning in school. You read the science textbook, articles, you absorb a lot of written knowledge. And this is important. You know, who wants a lawyer who's not studied the law books? Who wants a medical doctor performing brain surgery who's not gone to medical school and studied a lot about anatomy and the neurological system and so on? But beyond this sort of textbook or scientific knowledge, there's what Hayek called knowledge of localized time and place. The fact is that there is an immense amount of knowledge not learned in textbooks in a formal sense, but is dependent upon the experiences and the interactions and what you learn in each of our different corners of the society that can only be known and appreciated by those on the spot and is passing and changing all the time. And this is the kind of knowledge, Hayek argued, that can never be passed on to a central planner. The central planner can hire experts who are masters of the textbook knowledge. Well, what's the laws of physics? What are the rules of chemistry? What are the technological formulas and blueprints? But that's only one level of the most important knowledge. Each and every one of us knows things that the rest of us don't. Again, if I can say how I explain it to my students, if someone were to ask, where is all the knowledge of the world? You might say, well, the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., one of the biggest libraries on the planet. It has books in virtually every language, on every subject, old books, new books, and literally in the Library of Congress are no doubt hundreds of miles of books on all of those bookshelves. But if we ask, where does the knowledge of the world reside? It resides in no one volume. The knowledge of the world is divided in different forms of different types, some new knowledge, some out-of-date knowledge, some old knowledge compatible with new knowledge, dispersed in all of the books, on all of the miles of shelves of books. And I tell my students, that's where all of the knowledge of the world resides, in little bits in each of our minds, where we know things of various local and specialized and particular forms and shapes and types in changing circumstances that others cannot know, and is only known and mastered by a particular place and position and activities in that diverse and spread out division of labor in the society. Now, Hayek's question in this article was, well, if the knowledge of the world resides in no one place for a central planner to easily and sufficiently take advantage of, but if all of us are dependent upon what everyone else knows that we don't, how can all of this knowledge be brought together, coordinated, integrated? And he said that the miracle of the market is done by the fact that it's not necessary for everybody to know each other directly, or to know why they know what they know, or how they know it, or what they want to use their particular knowledge specifically for their specific personal ends as a human being. It is sufficient if people can communicate a sort of a limited amount of information to others, so that others can know enough to apply their own knowledge in ways that benefit themselves by assisting others to advance their own goals. And he said that's what the prices do. And if I can use this example, Jacob, it's uses in the article. Imagine the tin miner in Malaysia, in Southeast Asia. Should he mine tin out of the side of a mountain? Well, how does he know who wants tin? He doesn't know all the tin users and the tin manufacturers and the final goods that all of the raw tin could go into. He doesn't need to know all of these people. It is sufficient through the prices that people offer as demanders of the product, that there are users for tin. This is their intensity of demand. This is the prices they might offer for it in different parts of the global economy. And therefore, it might be profitable to make it. But is it profitable? He has to know other things. Who are all the people who are competing against him for the hiring of labor, the use of resources, the building and the application of machinery, tools, and equipment with which one extracts the tin out of the mine. And what about the mountain in which the mine is itself? Are there other uses for the mountain that might be more valuable and important than his own tin mining? Could it be used as a wildlife area? Could the mountain be a tiered set of condos that people might want to use either as their homes or as a vacation resort? How do we know any of these things? In other words, how can he know all the alternative uses and applications that other businessmen have for the labor, land, and capital he could use going into mining tin, and for which there are valued purposes? He doesn't need to communicate with all the other businessmen in all the other places around the world who could use those resources and raw materials and capital and labor. It is sufficient if through prices he's informed that others place values on them, bids for them. This is what this businessman would pay to hire labor, to purchase machinery and tools, to acquire resources and raw materials or component parts. These market prices then tell him the cost side of the market. And if he were to hire the necessary labor and land and resources and raw materials and capital equipment, given what he anticipates are the prices of the demanders on the other side of the market, would it be profitable or not? Would the selling price be greater than the cost prices? And would there be a way, given these cost prices, to minimize his expenses to get the most out of what he is attempting to do and maximize his profit? The price system does all this for him. It is what Hayek called the telecommunication system of the marketplace. It's the common denominator through which all the complexities of information are minimized and reduced for simple calculation, evaluation, comparison, and judgment. Would this be profitable or not? Is there a way to make it less expensively to maximize my profit? Should the resources be used for my purposes or somebody else, given what they'd be willing to pay in the form of prices for them, as opposed to my estimated value of them to make this particular product, such as mining tin out of a mountain to then sell to producers who would then make the final tin-based products that consumers might want, such as a tin can in which your processed corn or peas are that you buy in the supermarket. Therefore, prices are the means by which everybody communicates with everyone else. It integrates information, it coordinates information, and then disperses that information back to people to let them know what to do, how to do, where to do, when to do. And therefore, it enables the dispersed knowledge among what is now the 7.5 billion people on this planet to all be coordinated with what others are doing for the mutual gain and benefit of each. And while at the same time leaving each person the liberty, the latitude of freedom of choice as producer and consumer to pursue his own goals and purposes through the free and voluntary competitive exchanges and transactions with his fellow human beings, both next door in the literal sense or halfway around the globe. That is the miracle of the market that Hayek saw. And if once one grasps this, Jacob, this insight of the spontaneous coordination of all that goes on in the market while leaving people free to use their own specialized knowledge and coordinating what everyone could do and might be willing to do through the communication systems of competitive prices for outputs and inputs, you now have the ability for a globalized economy that assures both freedom of action as producer and consumer and person, and yet at the same time integrates everything that everyone is doing for mutual benefit. Now, does that mean that everything goes right? People err, make mistakes, but that's the very purpose of using the price system and experiencing the profits or losses as the feedback mechanism to tell you if what you're doing is successful or something you need to adapt to because your judgment has turned out not to be correct. That is the beauty of it. You don't need government planning. In fact, planning would stymie this because no one mind or group of minds can know all of that dispersed knowledge that the price system coordinates over the planet. Nor do you need the regulations and the interventions to guide and direct people how best to do something, where to do something, how to do something. In fact, the regulators and planners, again, do not have the adaptability or the knowledge to constantly adjust and modify what they're doing, guided by the knowledge you possess and what prices inform people to do, including yourself, that only the market enables people to successfully do. So neither socialism nor the interventionist regulatory economy is needed for a market to work. In fact, the more you rely upon government, the more it is like sand in the machine that prevents the mechanisms of price and competition and mutual adjustment of actions as producers and consumers from efficaciously coming together with the best and most successful results for rising standards of living and human flourishment.
Well, that's an excellent, thank you, summation of Hayek and his life and this major contribution that he made that he got the Nobel Prize for, the use of knowledge in society. And your point about the price system is great. I mean, it's really an intricate system. It's a very complex system, but yet it's simple in the sense that people don't have to know they don't have to understand the whole process by which it works. As you were talking, I was thinking about immigrants, that an immigrant in Mexico, he doesn't have to know what the situation is in the state of Oregon with respect to the harvesting of crops. He just hears that wage rates are soaring up there, and that's the invitation that he needs just to go on up there. He doesn't need to investigate why these prices of labor are going up. He just follows that signal. And I think the corollary to this is that when government tampers with this price system by inflating the money supply, tampering with the money supply, it really damages the ability of people to rationally calculate that part of this price system is in monetary units. And absent government involvement in the monetary sphere, the free market would be determining what that medium of exchange is: gold, silver, American Express, banknotes, Bitcoin, or whatever. But people could rationally make their decisions into that price system. But once government takes control of the monetary system and starts tampering with it, then how are people supposed to rationally make these decisions? Let me shift gears.
I just add to that very point. A couple of years after he won the Nobel Prize in 1974, Hayek wrote a small book called Denationalization of Money, precisely raising the issue: why does government have to be in the money business or money regulation business at all? This too, like everything else, should be left up to the spontaneous choices, decision coordination of the market itself.
All right, let me shift gears a minute here. That one of his greatest books, most famous books, is The Road to Serfdom. I think it was published in 1944. Would you explain why that book was so important, why it had such a huge effect on people, and do you feel the book's relevant today?
Yes. Probably, if someone has heard about Hayek and is a non-economist, has probably heard of him because of The Road to Serfdom. As you said, Jacob, this was published during the midst of the Second World War in 1944. And the theme of this book was that, with no bad intentions, and in fact, not appreciating at all where a set of ideas and policies might very well lead, Hayek argued that the more the government controls, commands, regulates, and intrudes, the more that government by necessity has to become tyrannical. If the government is to impose a central plan, then everyone in their actions as consumer and producer must adapt and be submissive to what the plan entails. We are confined within the central plan, and we must conform to the central plan. This means that our latitudes and liberties as individual consumers, as individual producers, is basically taken away from us. The government decides what will be produced. The government decides in what quantities and qualities and varieties, and how it will be allocated or dispersed or rationed among all the members of the society. So now you are dependent upon what the central planners, a small handful of, quote, governmental experts, decide to be the case. So our freedom as consumers and producers are taken away. Second of all, he warned about the loss of civil liberties, not just these economic freedoms. If the government becomes the central planner of society, it determines on the allocation and use of all available resources in that society. So resources are scarce. What kind of newspapers will be published? What kind of magazines will be produced? What movies will be sponsored to be filmed, or performances in theaters, or shows on television, or shows on the radio, or streaming? All of these would now be decided by the central planner. Invariably, the central planners, pursuing and determining that the plan is good and right, will be censoring any dissenting views that threaten both the possibility of a completion of the plan or the enthusiasm for the plan. let us suppose that you're religious and you would like to have a house of worship with those who share your faith or denomination. Well, that requires land. That requires construction material to build the church. That requires the materials for printing and publishing of the Bibles and the hymnals, the means of road access to be able to go to the house of worship that you would like to construct and then share with people of a common faith. But the government is allocating the resources. Their priorities, their values, their prejudices end up determining these things. What if they decide that land is more valuable for a veterans hospital or for a factory or for an apartment complex in a particular community? And far lower is the social needs for another house of worship. What if they say, well, you can have the land? Yeah, we have some land of it, but resources are scarce, and we just cannot afford to centrally plan the allocation and use of construction, the People's Construction Company, to build the church, to allocate the resources and materials out of which the church will be built. Or we have printing demands on us, public school textbooks and other reading material and the lesson plans that have to be prepared, and the various planning agenda publications. We just don't have the print and the ink and the publishing facilities to publish these many Bibles and hymnals. So you're just going to have to wait, or in fact, your priority is not ours. Maybe you can just practice singing without a book. Maybe you could remember biblical passages and just share that with each other like that way, if you can. So all of these become threatened. And finally, democracy itself. If a plan is to be imposed upon the society, it has to have continuity, does it not? You can't be changing the plan every day, then it's not a plan in terms of centrally directing the society. You can't have democracy in which a changed majority every 2 or 4 years say, no, new guys in, either with a different plan or no plan. My God, we've been implementing a central plan that takes 6 years to complete. What if pro-market people take over in the next election and overthrow the plan? My God, all those efforts and works unfinished, the goals and targets to help people shunted aside by these cruel pro-market profiteering advocates of liberty. Oh no, we can't have that. So the plan must have transcendence over the whims and changes and uncertain currents of mere democratic elections. So Hayek's point here is that, and I'm not even doing justice to all of the themes in the book, that ultimately controlling the economy means controlling what and how things are done, which at the end of the day means controlling people and everything that goes in their lives. So regardless of the good intentions of the socialists, their system, even if they don't want to, leads to a system of rigid straitjacking of life and society to fit and conform to the plans of the handful who view themselves as elect to determine the future and the fate of all of us.
All right, well, let me share with you my favorite book by Hayek, and that's The Constitution of Liberty. Given my legal background, I was a trial attorney for 12 years down in Texas. And when I discovered the Constitution of Liberty, I was enthralled. I just absolutely love this book because he was integrating legal principles and Supreme Court decisions and so forth with the principles of economic liberty. And this is where I learned the principle of the rule of law, which is so widely misunderstood. You ask the average public official, especially those in Congress, that what is your concept of the rule of law? And they will inevitably say, oh, it means that people have to obey the law. That's the rule of law, that you have to obey the law, whether you like it or not. Well, that's not the principle behind the rule of law. And this is what Hayek taught me. The rule of law is that in a free society, people are entitled to know what conduct is going to be permitted and not permitted by duly enacted law. In other words, let's assume that there's no laws against drug usage or drug possession, marijuana, or cocaine, heroin. And the president simply says, well, it's bad for people. So I'm ordering this DEA organization to go out and start arresting people. Well, that would be a violation of the rule of law because there's no law that says this. It hasn't been duly enacted. It's just the arbitrary decree of a dictator, really saying, well, I don't want people to do it, and I want to go arrest them, and I'm going to punish them. So in lieu of that, or instead of that, you enact a law through Congress that says any possession of illicit drugs is illegal. This is what's going to happen to you if you're caught. Well, as Hayek points out, the rule of law, complying with the rule of law, is not a sufficient condition for a free society. It's a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition, because we all know that just because you have drug laws doesn't mean you live in a free society. A free society is where there are no drug laws and where the ruler does not have the authority to punish you. And so I absolutely loved it. I was a little disappointed with the Constitution of Liberty, because in there Hayek favored a minimal welfare state, which I just could not understand, which is probably why I was more attracted to Mises. But overall, Richard, I think the Constitution of Liberty is a fantastic book that I would recommend to anyone.
I'll second that for complementary reasons. Not only is part 2 of that book a brilliant explanation, an historical interpretation, and analysis of the importance of law and the rule of law, but part 1 of the book is one of the most profound defenses of human liberty ever penned, because he takes his ideas about decentralized knowledge and dispersion of information and the need for liberty to allow the importance of liberty for all of us in allowing our neighbors the latitude and freedom to make these choices themselves. But he then extends it to saying is that it is precisely because knowledge is dispersed and no one knows enough that we must understand that society cannot be and has not been designed or planned. And in fact, it is only by allowing that free spontaneity of individual human activity and free association that society can evolve and develop in better and superior ways, far greater than the planner can ever impose. And I believe that part 1 of that book is one of the most subtle defenses of the free society on the idea that freedom is important, not because of what we know, but because of what each of us as individuals can never know. And freedom is important precisely by allowing our neighbors the latitude and liberty that we would want for ourselves, that we can gain and benefit from all that they know and can do that is beyond our capacity ourselves to ever achieve.
All right, on that eloquent note, we'll wrap it up. We're out of time. Thank you, Richard. Greatly enjoyed the visit as always. And thank you for tuning in. Come and visit us at fff.org. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribe to our monthly journal. Oh, and our FFF Daily, which we strive and have strived for, 20 years now, to make the finest daily libertarian commentary page on the internet, including my daily blog and including a monthly article by Richard, and then articles that Richard writes for other organizations. And I guess that's it. Thanks for your support. And Richard, I'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Until next time, I just thank our viewers for joining us.